never drank coffee
regularly or ever.
I've had sips enough to let me know that is not a flavor. In other words, from my perspective, most people don't like coffee.
Yeah.
They like creamer and sugar in their coffee, therefore they drink coffee.
Yeah.
But if to have...
And they like creamer, sugar, and caffeine.
Yes.
To wake up.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah. And I guess, like I say, I typically consider myself self-caffeinated.
Yeah.
In that wake up process.
Yeah.
It's like I just wake up.
Yeah.
And so I've never really gotten into drinking coffee. I mean, I've tried the mochas and the caramel lattes and stuff,
Do you like that?
It's okay.
Yeah.
But it still just has that bitter.
Yeah. My dad does not like coffee. He would agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, why would I subject myself to that bitterness, when I don't like that flavor? Welcome to How I See It with me, Mark Pratt, and
Justin Sternberg. This is a podcast that works to counter cultural polarization through thoughtful conversations. Hey, thank you for listening to our podcast. If you like How I See It, please do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Subscribe, rate, review, follow us, and or talk nicely about us on social media. If you want to reach out, the email is us@howiseeit.click. Yep, I said .click, as in .click. Please tell your friends about this show, and we'll see you on the next one.
It's kind of like the rolling your tongue thing. Like some people can roll their tongue, some people can't. I feel like some people really that taste of coffee is just off-putting.
Yeah.
And others it's complimentary to their cream and sugar, and others it's
because I wouldn't even necessarily waste my money on coffee ice cream.
Yeah.
Because it's just why would you choose a bitter ice cream?
Yeah. I hear you.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's my take on coffee.
Yeah.
But
my dad would agree. I don't translate the taste of coffee as bitter anymore. Like that's
I probably
long gone.
Yeah.
And I think that's just from drinking,
Sure.
whatever. There are some coffees that are gross, like Starbucks.
Really?
Yes, I do not like Starbucks.
Oh
coffee.
wow!
Yeah,
we're gonna get letters on that.
That's right. Bring them on. I think most pure, like real coffee drinkers would agree. They're like mixed drinks, right? Like they're fancy drinks. Most people like those. I mean, it's hard not to like that much sugar.
Okay.
I like those drinks. I'm just saying, like they're pure coffee.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, I don't like, and I know a lot of people also don't like it, but.
Yeah.
Also, some people do, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I think, I'm not a big fan of just plain sugar either. When I see, like to have to put a tablespoon of just granulated sugar in something reminds me of a kid when I had to put, 2 tablespoons of sugar on Cheerios to kind of make them,
palatable.
Like the rest of the cereals out there. But I've stepped away from that, I guess. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, there's also something to be said for caffeine, of course, too, which, I think a lot of people like caffeine. People could say I'm in denial, and that's fine. I've never felt the effects of caffeine very much. And in fact, if I drink too much caffeine, sometimes I'll get sleepy. You know what I mean?
Okay. Adverse.
Yeah, and then also it will...
No, hang on now. You just said I drink coffee to help me wake up, but I don't...
I didn't say that. I don't drink it to help me wake up.
Oh, you don't?
No.
Because maybe that was...
I like the taste of coffee. I drink black coffee. You know that. Like, I don't... I agree with you about the cream and sugar thing. Like, I actually really like the taste of coffee, and I enjoy the warm liquid experience too. So it's
Okay.
that combo. Because I
All
like
right.
tea sometimes just for the warm liquid
Because
thing.
I thought you had mentioned, and maybe it was prior to recording, we won't be able to go back and, do the challenge flag on it. But I thought you had mentioned that, and maybe you were speaking about people in general.
I was,
using coffee to help them wake up, that kind of thing.
Well, you
But-
said people only like the sugar and cream. I said
Okay.
also they like being able to wake up in the caffeine.
Yeah, okay.
That's the challenge flag right there.
I gotcha. No, that's fair enough. This is how we see it, That's how I heard it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So no wake up effect for you.
Yeah.
If anything, if you drink too much, you can get dozy.
I think the older I get, though, it does have some effects more than it did when I was younger. And where I see it the most is if I drink it late at night. Sometimes I'll have a hard time sleeping. And it's like 1 in 5 times it will. So I don't drink coffee at night anymore.
Okay.
Although every Friday night I drink coffee at Celebrate Recovery.
Okay.
Just lots of it.
Wow.
Yeah. That's my drug of choice when I go to my recovery program.
It's coffee.
Yes.
Caffeine.
Yeah. But by the time, when I go to bed, I never have trouble sleeping Friday nights.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it.
So, I mean, there's more to that too, probably. But, so, it's, I don't know. I don't drink it for the caffeine. At least that's what I believe.
Yeah.
I also drink half calf. Like my pot I make every day is half caffeine.
So would you be subject to the headaches if you go a day without it?
That's why I actually switched to half calf because I would notice that.
Okay.
And I would get headaches. I think it still can occur depending on how, if I stick to my 1 pot a day, which is half calf.
Sure.
And I don't drink it a day after or 2 days, it doesn't bother me.
Okay.
But if I increase it, if I do my pot plus some other cups, and that kind of becomes a normal thing, I can feel the withdrawal effects, I guess.
Yeah. Huh. Fair enough.
Everything you ever wanted to know about Justin's coffee habit.
Yes. Brought to you by How I See It.
Yep.
Yeah.
So is that a good segue
Sure.
to, what's that word?
To tetrahydrocannabinol. Cannabinol. There you go.
Cannibalism.
Tetrahydrocannabinol.
We've never talked about cannibalism.
No, we have not.
That would be pretty cut and dried.
I would think it would be, yes.
That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about
Cannabinol.
cannabinol.
Yep.
Also known as
THC.
Yes.
Otherwise known as marijuana.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why are we talking about that, Mark?
Well, it's interesting because I think it is a polarizing topic, and it was, I think there are both sides of a story people are going to look at marijuana differently.
Yes.
No doubt about it. It's a how I see it topic. And, and I think there again, it needs to be a topic that we're able to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we're talking about it. Not that you and I are going to necessarily be on any opposing sides of the fence type thing, but yeah, at the same time, I'm going to try.
So also, I 100% agree with everything you said. I wrote down some statistics from some of these articles we were reading.
Okay,
just because because it kind of makes the point for me.
Sure.
That I want to make, which is, so some of those statistics are more than 1 in 3 Americans live in states where it's legal to smoke pot recreationally.
Sure.
538 reports. Over 60% of adults say both medical and recreational marijuana use should be legal according to Pew. Additional 31% are okay with legalizing just medical use. Let's see, there's another one here. Cannabis marijuana is the world's most commonly used illicit drug. Polls suggest that 1 in 8 U.S. adults smoke, and more than 40% of them have tried the drug at some point in their lifetime. A majority of states allow some form of medical marijuana use, and 9 states and Washington, D.C. have now legalized recreational use. So for me, the answer to the question of why are we talking about this is because a lot of people are...
It's a topic.
It's a topic, yeah.
No
It's
doubt.
a real thing. People are people around you are using it or actively involved in the culture.
No doubt.
Whether we're talking about it or not, right? And so that's, for me, kind of the thing that we kind of just have to pull our heads out of the sand a little bit and just talk about this subject that is very much a real thing for a large chunk of people in your life.
No doubt.
Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. And it's interesting because I'm sure, and granted, our range of listenership based on an age group, we're not necessarily going to be hitting, that really older group. But my sense is, that older group is definitely going to have a different viewpoint on marijuana than some of our younger group. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying even in my lifetime, in other words, I know that my kids or people know who to go to in their vicinity to be able to purchase marijuana today. And that was something that I never knew about, for me at that same age. You follow me? It wasn't even something that, I'm sure if I wanted to ask certain people, I could have found it, but it wasn't like something that I knew exactly who to go to. Yeah. And, and even, and here again, maybe a little, what do you call it? Disclaimer. I am not an addictions counselor. Okay. I'm just going to put that disclaimer in there, but I definitely work with people. I've definitely seen how, the effects of marijuana tend to affect some of my clients. You follow me? Yeah. So some of what I speak about, I'm going to, bring from some personal experience, but that disclaimer there to say, I'm not an addictions counselor, but I think I see what you're describing, in my office in that process of more and more people are and I just had a couple that I was working with last night, who he is very much, if you will, it comes out of the ground. It's good. Yes. Perspective.
Oh yes. Yes.
That's kind
not uncommon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think, that's part of that growing, part of that 60% that we see, and I think, legalization versus decriminalization are, two other, words that kind of get thrown in there. But most of the time when we're talking about states, we're talking about legalization, and therefore it becomes public access at that point.
Yeah. And all that to say, I just don't feel like most Christian cultures or whatever have addressed this topic well enough,
No, I hear you.
Because as the states open up and the legality, it's like we no longer can depend on legality informing our morality, which interestingly enough, one of the pastors at our church just spoke on addiction a little bit this last week, and he talked about this stuff too. So
no doubt.
But yeah, that same concept, like. I think churches, in some ways leaned on that a little too much to just say, well, it's illegal. So there's your answer. And, I mean, we can debate the merits of where morality and legality, sit in terms of whether you should obey the law, that kind of thing. That's not really what this episode's about. This is more about the conversation and saying.
Sure. Right. And I thought when, Jeremy, gave his, I thought it was definitely an interesting.
The pastor who spoke on this,
he definitely brought up a good point as far as in Scripture where sorcery is used. That's where we get in the Greek, that's where we get our word pharmacy, pharmakeia. There's a Greek word for that.
I think it was pharmakeia, yeah.
But, that's where the basis of that word was. And I did look into that a little more. I found where, he had kind of found that. And it had more to do with the combination of like witchcraft, spells, and drugs, these things that tend to alter a person's being, if you will. That was where that word. It's not just witchcraft, which I appreciate his point. It does include that aspect of drugs and things that alter the individual. Yeah. So, that being said, I'm going to recognize for me personally, and I think I conclude biblically speaking, things that alter who we are, the Bible is against. Those things, Bible tells us not to be intoxicated. In other words, especially holds leadership, in a high example of that, from the Kings, in Proverbs, more, and that definitely, more in regards to alcohol at times, when we're talking about, but when we think about that, that aspect of, I think the Bible is very clear, that we're not to be out of control of our bodies in an intoxicated form.
Yeah.
So I think, that is something, that we can address, in this process. And I think it can come, I would hear someone who can basically, and I'm drawing a little connection here. I can hear someone who would basically say, okay, it's legalized in my state. I'm gonna go there. It's legalized in my state, and therefore, the line is drawn. The connection is drawn between alcohol and marijuana. So if I can legally consume alcohol, which the Bible talks about as well, I'm drawing this connection to where, as long as I'm not going above this line of intoxication, it should be okay for me.
Right.
Based on that similarity to alcohol. So, I mean,
and I think you and I fall in the same place of, there's not an inherently evil plant or chemical, right?
I hear you.
Right.
I would dare say all things, God has given us all things for life and godliness.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I think all plants have a purpose. And granted, when I think of poppy and opium and, it's like, okay, I can understand, it's I guess in some ways I'll look at that as Scripture refers to money. It's not that money is bad.
Right.
It's the love of money.
Yeah.
You follow me?
Yeah.
And I think and the hemp, and this is where it gets complicated for me personally, because I recognize
it is complicated. I guess that's what I wanted.
Yeah, because I'm recognizing that there was a whole hemp industry, if you will, that was basically coincided with the cotton industry. But because of the effects of marijuana and these other things, hemp fell aside. In other words, it's lost its share of the market at much at the same time as prohibition, from my perspective. But that doesn't mean that hemp, marijuana, that corded part of it isn't just as viable as cotton. You follow me?
I'm trying.
Oh, well, from its original source. In other words, when we look at a plant as a plant, marijuana has other byproducts that are usable, the plant itself, besides its intoxicating particles, THC. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That makes
sense. I'm in agreement with you that it's not the evil plant. It's what we do with it that tends to lean towards what can become evil.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. There's another verse, as we're talking about verses, there's another verse about not being enslaved, like,
sure,
avoid anything that will enslave you, and so I think that might be the most, to me, one of the more relevant scriptures in regards to anything that's addictive, whether it's alcohol or marijuana or whatever, is the enslaving is very problematic. And then, like you said, the intoxication is very problematic. Both of those things by nature are not easy to delineate, to draw a clear line to say, this is when you're drunk and this is when you're not.
Exactly.
This is when you're enslaved. This is when you're not.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. One of the articles we read was by John Piper. I read a couple by him. And his perspectives kind of shifted in many ways. It was a little hard to pin down what he was saying, but one of the things he said very clearly was that we're not meant to live by rules. We're meant to live by the Spirit.
Sure.
And I love that, because that's if there's anything I wanted to be heard out of this episode would be like, listen to the Spirit. Like,
yeah. And
you know?
Another thing I appreciated about that specific article, we tend to think, it's like there's this, and I think there is maybe onslaught is too strong a word, but when we think about states and legalization, I'll quite often hear, well, North Carolina won't be long, before, but in that process, I think having the conversations is also beneficial because, he was in that article, he mentioned how Utah had actually, there were individuals in the state of Utah, religious individuals, if I may say so, church affiliated individuals, who basically fought to make sure that Utah wasn't one of those states that legalized marijuana. Mm-hmm. So I think, that's another advantage to having these conversations. And, even in what I was looking at it, it was funny to kind of recognize. Yeah, I like researching. I like reading articles, but it's like I'm always calling into question where a source comes from.
Yeah.
You follow me?
That's why I like reading so many and from different, because you kind of get a sense of where you are in the middle of all these voices, and you can
because it was agree. Funny. Yeah. I wanted to kind of see, a lot of the art. I looked into Colorado, as a part of that beginning of the industry, if you will, and there was a ton of stuff, based on 2014, when it really came out, and they were talking about, the aspects of how it was supposed to be this wonderful thing and generate, tax dollars and, that, and it really never met that goal. And it was funny. I hadn't heard about this before, but we hear about people who are anti cattle or anti because of the water usage and all that. And it was interesting because when Colorado first did that, they recognized that there was a ton of individuals who started growing at home. And they realized that they were having problems with the electrical grid because people were, having lamps and, to where it was supposed to lower, this, what do you call it? Utility costs. It was supposed to lower the utility costs, but people were using more electricity to grow their plants, and it's like, the amount of water that it took to grow was like all those predictions were off. But it was funny because in the article I happened to be reading from the University of Colorado, so like you say, I took that with a little bit of the title of the article was Colorado's mellowing marijuana usage. Well, and the interesting part was it was recently, as in 2023, they were citing that it was a $1.3 billion industry in 2023. 2022 is a $1.7 billion industry. And the interesting part was it went to, in 2021, it was a $2.2 billion industry. Mm-hmm. So they were showing that, as a decline, but it also, there was no mention of what else was going on in 2021, which was
after COVID.
Okay, that whole, it made me think about it. It's like, okay,
everyone's sitting at home.
Yes.
Let's try out these plants we've been growing.
Exactly.
That's true.
Everybody's home, It just made me think about it in that
everyone
context.
Is trying to cope with the world going crazy.
Yes, the world's going in a handbasket here. Let's just mellow for a bit, So it really, I would have loved to have seen it on like a chart, a flow chart, to be able to show that spike, if you will. But I just thought that was interesting that there was no mention of, the COVID epidemic and all that went along with, 2020, 2021, that kind of thing. But
I think that's so interesting in terms of all the numbers and stuff, because the other thing too is there's always the shiny and new syndrome, right?
Sure.
So, the whole state turning and growing them themselves and all that, just kind of the impact that wasn't anticipated was, to me, I think partly partly easily explained by that shiny and new and like,
Sure.
I've never done marijuana my whole life, but now it's legal. Let's do this right. Let's grow a plant. Let's, whatever. I don't know. I could see how you anticipate just the normal usage that's currently happening, but now it's being used through a legal channel.
Sure.
And I think that's, obviously not what happened, it sounds like. But I also don't think that that's not necessarily a sustainable arc, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I think you'll get some people who are now like, this is their thing, they're addicted, whatever, maybe addicted, maybe not, but it's their thing. But I also think there would be a lot of people who just go back to life, like you said. They have to go back to work. They have to whatever.
Yeah.
A lot of the science, the math, the numbers, the stats around marijuana is just so limited because of the illegal nature of it for so long that there wasn't as much science being done about it. There wasn't as much statistics being done about it,
Sure.
So it's interesting to even read some of these articles and say, we're starting these randomized trials and, they've been started, but like we need years and years before we can kind of trust the data.
Sure.
So that's also interesting to me, considering how long this plant's been used for.
Yes.
It's like, what have you guys been doing? Like, why didn't you start studying this a long time ago?
No, I hear you.
That's surprising to me that there's not nearly as many studies on it.
Well, I think in some ways it was part of that stigma. We're not going to study an illegal drug necessarily.
And maybe access too, like access to people who are willing to, just access to the drug itself. Just access in general would be very.
Now we have states that are basically conducting their own, case study, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just interesting, and I don't know, maybe you read this, maybe you didn't. I thought it was interesting too, because they, in the research that I was reading, and like I say, some of those were the earlier days, but they talked about it creating its own black market, if you will, because of the fact that it was a state's issue. There wasn't federal, you couldn't use federal money, in other words, you couldn't use, there was that connection to federal money that because it wasn't legal federally, you couldn't access federal resources. You follow me? And so in some ways people were going around and it made its own black market, if you will. And it was just kind of an interesting thing to see about how, even as far as when it was legalized, like the postal industry, like took a major spike because people were actually shipping marijuana out of Colorado because they could legally. So that was a part of that industry, if you will, that basically said, okay, yeah, if we, if I can purchase it legally, but I can ship it illegally, I can still, reap a income from this, and it was just kind of interesting how they talked about it as far as, some of the adverse effects that no one would have predicted. And or maybe there were those that did predict, but, it was caught, definitely kind of a caught off guard. And I think, and the other part too, were a lot of the states around Colorado, well, I don't even think Colorado itself was prepared from an addictions type, be it mental health dynamic, and the states around them were definitely kind of flooded, with this dynamic of addictions counseling now.
Really?
They really had as we look at it, and I mean, granted, these are some of the things that kind of go in the back of my mind, when I'm, talking with a 22-year-old college student that basically says, hey, this is just something I'm going to do for the next 2 years. And, and yet I realize that can be arrogance, on that part, to be able to say, yeah, I can cut this out whenever I want to, but currently this is how I wrap up the end of every day.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And it's, it's like, that's the part that, and the more I see, it needs to be legalized, the more I'm, recognizing, okay, not necessarily sure the benefits are there. Not saying I minimize what the chemical is able to do for those who struggle with pain.
Yeah.
You follow me? That was another part, I think, of the Piper articles, that basically said, there are, medicinal, values to this that help people with pain. Yeah. And yet, a lot of the industry, if you will, isn't regulated from a medical standpoint.
Right.
You follow me? It's more recreational.
Right.
In its usage by far.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess for me, so I drink coffee every day, know, and caffeine is my drug of choice. It's definitely a drug. It's definitely mind altering.
Sure.
Right?
Sugar itself.
Yep. So there's a continuum, as always, in most of our conversations of what addiction looks like and the impacts it has on your life.
Sure.
And I'm going to say, I'm probably the most ignorant person about marijuana that I know.
I gotcha.
I don't know the negative impacts. I don't know I've done reading, obviously. Sure. I can see that, but I know a lot of people like you who do it regularly, and they seem normal.
Do what? Like you
smoke marijuana?
You're not referring to me doing marijuana regularly.
Do you? I don't know. Probably not.
A lot of people like you who do it regularly, so that's where.
I know a lot of people like you know a lot of people. I know a lot of people like Mark who do it regularly.
Exactly.
That's funny. That's not what I was saying. In case you.
But no, I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Clarify. I guess my question is I don't believe coffee's wrong. I believe, just like anything, if you're enslaved to it, it's wrong. You should address that. You should listen to the Holy Spirit. Say, hey, chill out on the coffee. Switch to half calf, maybe.
Sure.
Chump.
Chump.
That was what I heard.
Yeah, was that what you heard?
Yeah. Well, not chump, but maybe chump. I can't remember.
Does God refer to us as a chump?
Lovingly.
Okay, that's fair enough.
A little pat on the top of the back of the head. Come on, chump. That
there you go. Okay.
I think sometimes God operates in that way.
His spirit's personal to us.
Yes.
Yes.
And anyway, and alcohol's another one, right? Where it's we just discussed that on Sunday. There's no clear, scriptures that say do not drink alcohol, and people who say Jesus turned water into grape juice are just, I believe in denial. I think it was legit alcohol. I think there's a reason the party dude said this is the best I've ever had.
Yep.
That kind of. It wasn't because this is really good grape juice.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Most people save the good grape juice for the end when everybody's had enough grape juice. No, everyone's intoxicated, so they save the worst for last. That's
the reality of it not being grape juice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a little silly to go grape juice, but that's what I grew up on, right?
Yeah.
It was grape juice, and we just put that denial, mask on, saying it's grape juice.
Sure.
But anyway, so alcohol obviously has terribly negative consequences. In fact, a lot of these articles I was reading was saying, THC and marijuana's impacts are barely compared to the negative aspects of alcohol in terms of what it can do to your body, but also addictive capacity.
I gotcha.
And also impacts to culture, or the culture, that kind of thing. Again, not advocating for marijuana use or anything like that. I'm just saying, we put it in its own category, and I think it needs to be fit inside of these other categories so that we can make a proper judgment.
Sure. And I think part of that proper judgment is looking at what it does as a whole to the majority of people.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because as you're drawing the connection to alcohol, I'd agree, with everything you're saying. And I think we can also draw some of those connections to nicotine. Smoking, if you will, vaping, if you want, but seeing how that transformation, has occurred, and being able to recognize that, everybody has that uncle that smoked, Marlboros from the time they were 14 and they lived to be 95.
Everyone probably has an uncle who smoked marijuana too.
Yeah, might be a little more likely a hippie, but
the chill uncle versus the Marlboro man.
So there's gonna be these people that we're gonna be able to point to and say, well, this person uses it and it didn't create an issue.
It was fine. Air quotes, fine.
Air quotes, yes.
Yeah.
It was fine. And yet that's not going to be the story of everyone.
Right.
For the majority of people, that kind of thing. And it's interesting because another individual I was... he would fit that category of not an ex-hippie, but, he was that, grew up in that era, smoking the marijuana, to the point of basically saying, hey, if my kids want to learn about smoking marijuana, I'll go buy it and they can try it in front of me. That way, there's not an issue. Now, his wife, on the other hand, was on the other end of the spectrum. It's like, no, you're not doing that with our children.
Right.
That kind of thing, which I completely understand. And yet, listening to him today, he's also recognizing the difference between what he used to smoke back then and what's available today is a far different dynamic, as far as his concerns are more about the lacing effects that we've noticed over time, which, in this, and I think, there is a difference between like a pharmaceutical dynamic and, but what the average person can purchase, there are no controls or regulations over, that was another concern that he expressed as I'm having these, conversations with people. It's like, it's not the same thing that we were doing years ago, so where it's another aspect where that age, can tend to change my viewpoint on something. Yeah. It's like, I did live through that era and, and I probably did smoke too much, but yet at the same time, I'm not sure I have the same, he was willing to admit, I don't have the same view today that I did back then when I was raising our children, and I valued that, it's like he was able to say, okay, some of the circumstances have changed. And I think that's what we have to, I think both sides need to be able to recognize, okay, how do we have these conversations knowing that it's gone from an illegal substance in many ways, to a
pseudo legal.
Depending on the state, that kind of thing. So being able to have the conversation.
Yeah. And it's not even fully legal in the sense that it's not federally legal.
Sure. Exactly. It's a state issue.
Also very interesting to me as I read these. It's like, how does that, where do those lines fall? And I think, obviously the federal side of things has chosen to let the states override stand, right? Yeah. And I think overall that's a good thing because of states' rights and the way that the country is made. But it's just very interesting. But I definitely, I think that's the struggle for me. Again, not because I want to go out and smoke marijuana, but just like this conversation is like, well, I hear what people are saying about it's bad for you. It has these negative impacts. I also hear people say it has these potential positive impacts. I also hear the medical side, right? And so for me, I kind of separate the medical side completely over to the side and say that to me is fine, because if we're going to prescribe Vicodin to people, we also should have the option to prescribe medical marijuana.
I hear you.
Right. Like there's so much dangerous things that we prescribe to people, way worse.
Sure.
So I'm like, if that can be part, if that can be part of some sort of prescribed thing, fine. Like if a doctor he says, I think in your case this would actually be helpful. That's what medicine is. So for me, that line is pretty easy to draw, and I have no problem with that as far as that being a legalized thing. From my perspective, that's how I see it. Maybe there's science I'm missing. Maybe there's articles I'm missing where that would change my mind. That's okay.
No, I hear you.
It really just kind of comes down to the recreational thing and how, like, I enjoy cigars once in a while, and I enjoy it because I like sitting on the porch and smoking a cigar. It has this overarching feeling that comes with it of chill.
I got you.
And I've had some of my favorite conversations with people over a cigar. Like there's just something about sitting on a porch, looking out together and having a conversation and being tied to the porch through something. You know what I mean? Like I think that's what I've discussed this with a few of my friends who smoke cigars as well. Like the fact that for that period of that smoke, like you this is what you're doing.
Sure.
Right? You're not going in the house.
Yeah.
You're not driving, you're not whatever. This is you specifically sit down to smoke that cigar and enjoy that time.
Sure.
And so there's some to me
it's a bonding experience.
It's a bonding experience. It's a chill experience. I don't know. I enjoy it. You know what I'm saying? And again, for anyone who's afraid I'm saying I'm going to go out and buy marijuana and smoke it. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, like, how is it different? Explain it to me. Like, how should I be more cautious about marijuana, or is it the same? And like, you know, people who are saying, you know, marijuana is evil would look at the cigar thing and say the exact same thing. But I don't feel like that's the case. I feel like there's a stronger stigma. Can you speak to that? Is it, you know what I mean?
I think they'll, here again, can a person, in my opinion, can a person use marijuana like you use a cigar?
Right. Can they?
Can they? One usage type, limited in its, you know, not one after the other type thing, you know, in that process, you know, in its multiple forms of usage, you know, if you will. Can a person do what you did? Yes, I believe a person can. You know, is it likely that person will have a greater addictive effect with marijuana than your cigar? I would dare say yes. You follow me in that context. When I'm, and here again, I see a variety of people, I guess is what I'm saying. I have, you know, 20-year-olds who are in college basically saying, yep, I'm a stoner, you know, and I'm going to be a stoner for the next 2 years. And I'm just going to come out of this. And I'm going to look back at my college experience, you know, like my father, and say, yep, that was part of that experience. Now it's all behind me.
Yeah.
Now I can't guarantee that for that individual. You follow me? But yeah, I can also recognize he's looking at his father and recognizing that was a part of his experience, you know, and that's not to say that, you know, his father went on you know, he knows that his father no longer smokes, that kind of thing. You follow me? That's his example.
Yep.
And yet I also know other people who are fighting tooth and nail to try to stop because they have also recognized that there was a mellowness, you know, if you will, that chill. It did offer a chill. A lot of the people that I talk with, you know, started using marijuana to basically take that edge off as they describe it. You follow me? And I'm going to say, I'm going to say that 60% that we're talking about in some ways, you know, that are in favor, basically recognize that, yes, it had that effect. And yet when I speak with their spouses, you know, that desire continued. So now they do need to use it more to have the same effect. You follow me? That's just the reality of it. And, you know, here again, I'm saying that's, I'll say 2/3. You follow me? That just seemed that it's like, and a lot of times some of those individuals do connect, you know, like for you on the porch, you know, they connect alcohol with marijuana. In other words, it's something they like to do together, you know, for its effect, you know, and I think, you know, that makes it, you know, because we've always heard, or, you know, we've routinely heard of, you know, gateway, you know, I think so many people get concerned, you know, is it a gateway drug? Is it not a gateway drug? I don't think you can argue the fact that it can be a gateway. You follow me?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's
just like alcohol can be, just like smoking anything.
Right.
You know,
so
right?
to say that it's not
definitely,
a gateway,
I would say even more so because of its illegal nature.
Sure.
Does that make?
Yep.
I feel like that enhances the gatewayness of it.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah, but I think part of that gateway is also I'm also going to seek,
Right.
Something
diminishing
a little
effects to solve something.
Yes, because I'm looking for that same effect that I once had that has become diminished as you're sharing over time. That's my primary concern, with people. And, and I know individuals who have, who have quit and, they just one individual, loves Colorado for the skiing, but it's like, man, I have to really be careful about going back there because it is such a, it's so prevalent
in your face.
It's almost impossible for me to go to Colorado for the things that I enjoy, skiing, hiking in the mountains, but yet I find myself using when I go back there. And, and it's like, I don't want to use anymore because I see how it has affected that desire for mellowness, that I sought, it became the thing that I had to have. And it's like, I couldn't, in their viewpoint, I couldn't maintain my focus. And there again, people will use drugs to, combat ADHD, that kind of thing. One of those articles I believe talked about the guy that wanted to take up pipe smoking because he recognized nicotine helped him focus when he did smokeless tobacco, and it's like, okay, it was kind of to the point, are there other ways to accomplish this that we know aren't as cancer producing, in that process of, smokeless tobacco or pipe tobacco or, the adverse effects. I think we can become single-minded, or, what do you call that when you train track, it's like,
one track mind.
Myopic, if you will, one track mind. That's what I'm looking for, is that aspect, there's one advantage to this, and that is greater than all the other, adverse effects or disadvantages of it.
Yeah.
You follow me? And then I think that's where we have to look at these things from my perspective is how I see it. We have to look at the entirety. We have to look at the whole.
That's good. Yeah.
To be able to say, okay, is this beneficial, civilly? Is this beneficial individually? As we're promoting, or as we're allowing this legislation, if you will, to occur. That's my little soapbox. I'll step back down.
So I'll just be candid and say,
go right ahead.
I think my biggest reason to avoid it, besides, because again, I'm really just not a fan of avoid it because people say it's bad or, I want to hear what the Spirit's saying about it.
Sure.
And I think a lot of the arguments you're making are very much aligned with that kind of thing in terms of, can it enslave you, and is there a risk of that, and what are the benefits versus the negatives? Is it something that you really need, right? Like, is there a reason to do that kind of thing? But for me, I think the biggest concern would be just that with my struggle with depression, the concern would be that helps that, and I need that. Yeah. Right. And that's the thing that for me is the most, the biggest thing that makes me say it needs to be avoided, is what is the risk of it. Like, wow, when I do that, it kind of just solves all of that. Yes. And it's like, well, that sounds like, whenever that sentence is said, you're so close to addiction, right?
No
like, I think that
line isn't far away.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And so even with smoking a cigar, like, I try to avoid doing it when I feel bummed out as a way to, for me, it's a celebratory thing. Yep. It's an enjoyment on the porch. It's a opportunity to kick back kind of thing. If I feel like maybe that would make me feel better, I just don't.
No, I hear you. That's good self-awareness.
And because I think for me,
No,
I've
I
been
hear
part
you.
of Celebrate Recovery for so long. You just hear those stories, and that's like one of the most common denominators is like
Yes.
that solved my problem. And it's like,
Yes,
so I don't
it
want
made that
these-
feeling go away.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't want these things to be that. But again, that would be my biggest fear is that it would trigger that. It would cause that. It would, because I think, but at the same time, if there's some sort of medicinal prescription for that for people who are struggling with depression, and it is medicinally provided in dosages that are approved by the doctor, and
Sure.
whatever. I'm not saying that's bad either.
No, I gotcha.
In the same sense that I don't think taking the medication they give you to help with depression is bad.
Right.
Right. And if you read the like side effects of marijuana, that's like can cause depression, can cure depression, right? Like both things.
Right.
A lot of prescription drugs for depression say exactly the same thing.
Sure.
Right.
No, I hear
right?
you.
Like
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean,
So-
like your example with coffee, it's like caffeine doesn't have the same effect, that it does. I mean, Ritalin, was an ADHD, and it's like caffeine, that was an early medication. Caffeine was actually used in the same way to treat ADHD early on because some kids actually mellowed with caffeine, that
Yep.
kind of thing to where, that's, and I, even in one of the classes that we have now, we're talking about the How We Love class, we talk about this attachment theory, if you will. And, and I had one, she's actually, I believe, a nurse practitioner, a PA, and she was saying, well, how do you fix this attachment dynamic, and it's like, he said, and her next words were, because I know you can't do it with a pill, because my industry has tried, and it's like, we try, and yes, medication works in some cases for some things, but there are some things that, medication doesn't necessarily cure. And, and let alone how it alters the individual, to beyond. And here again, I'm not anti-medication.
Right.
Don't get me, but we have to be able to recognize that we can't say this is a one size fits all perspective, a cure-all, like you're saying, to be able to make it go away.
And even under doctor supervision with prescriptions, they call it practicing medicine, right? And so what the way it works is we're going to try this. We're going to
Sure.
try this at this dosage for a period of time, and we're going to monitor it.
Yep.
And so there's built-in accountability. There's built-in moderation, right?
Yep.
And then in some cases, they'll up the dosage, they'll lower the dosage, they'll
Sure.
change to a different prescription
There's
depending on how
oversight.
it's impacting you. Yeah. So like, the good doctors are doing that, right?
I hear you.
And the bad doctors who don't have time saying, well, just up it a little bit, it should be fine,
I hear you.
and like, but yeah, I think there's the key component there is moderation and accountability.
Sure.
Right. And I think that's a key component to living a Christian life.
Sure.
It's moderation,
Self-control.
and accountability. Well, self-control
I mean,
comes
it's part of
through
the fruits of the
moderation
Spirit. Sure.
and accountability.
Sure.
I feel like, self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. And I think sometimes we think of it as something that's a single person effort. Like self-control is
No, I
something
never
I
see-
have
yeah,
to do
I see what you're
myself to get better
I
at
gotcha.
controlling myself. And I don't see
It's
it
my
that way.
job to do that.
Right.
No, I hear you.
As someone who's been involved in a recovery ministry for years and years and years and years.
Sure.
I recognize self-control comes through a group effort. It
Sure.
comes through moderation and accountability. I
Yep.
feel like those things are what provide the tool set to increase my self-control.
Sure. And I think the fruit of the Spirit, Holy Spirit offers that too through
Yes.
other people, through
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah,
with
I
Him.
think we're saying things, but
Yeah.
I'm glad you're clarifying. Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So I appreciate you bringing up the points as far as that, it's not about us being able to do it. And at times I think, like your example with the cigar, it can tend to lead towards isolation and independence. That from a recreational standpoint, I can just go and do this and it cures me. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a dangerous place to be.
Yeah.
In that process. Yeah.
I was also thinking about when you're talking about the medication side of things, and even caffeine for kids with ADHD or whatever. Mm-hmm. There's a reason medicine exists, right? Like we know that. We know that. Right. And the idea is there's an outsized effect on your body with this particular issue. And if we can limit that outsized effect to kind of be more normalized, mm-hmm. I think that's kind of an overgeneralized idea of what medicine is attempting to do is minimize the outside effects of these negative things on your body through medication so that you can go about life normally.
Sure.
Right? So it's not meant to dull your sense of sadness, for instance, when it comes to depression medication, to where you can't feel sadness. If it is doing that too much, you've gone beyond what the intention of good medicine is supposed to do. It's supposed to get you back to a normalized human experience as much as possible, right?
Yep. Most medications from a depressive standpoint tend to minimize your high and low end.
Okay.
You follow me?
Yeah.
It does create that to where that's the difficult part for most people on medication is, yes, it keeps them from going too low, but it will also moderate the high end as well.
Yeah.
It kind of takes out those peaks and valleys and kind of makes it a little more. So, I mean, that's, that's why most people don't necessarily like their medication because, I'm missing the higher end, the joy, the excitement at times when I'm keeping that low end at bay. But, for people who, may suffer from legitimate bipolar,
I was going to say
that's what you're looking to take away that manic where, I'm just up for 3 days straight, wallpaper in the bathroom, that kind of thing. Or, versus the bottom where it's like I'm in bed 3 days straight.
And you can see why the worse the extremes are in terms of highs and lows. So you get to the bipolar. That's a continuum, right? Of like, whoa, really high, really low. You can see the more high you're able to get, the more difficult it is to accept that medication to prevent that, because essentially you are superhuman for those 3 days or whatever.
I hear
you are capable of things beyond any normal human for that small amount of time, but then the dip comes and you are now human, right? Like your abilities are way below the normal human experience. And so for most people, that's a worthwhile trade. It feels that way.
No, I hear you.
90% of their time. In their lowest lows, it doesn't, of course. That's when they go to the doctor. That's when they want it solved, That's a whole nother thing. That whole topic. But back to the medication thing and your point about it does limit the highs and lows. I guess I just want to clarify what I was saying, which is I think the goal of medicine is just to limit the outsized negative effects. But we're dealing with substances that God created, not us as humans, and so therefore, like some of these medications are going to impact the highs. Maybe that wouldn't be the intention of the drug, but it's just part of the package deal, right? Like, sorry, this is going to have that effect. And I think that's where the accountability of doctors in saying, like, let's work with this. Let's figure out the dosage that maybe it doesn't stop the lows as much as we'd really like, but you're also still able to experience your life. And so maybe there's a level of dosage that keeps you from dying. Right? And I think a lot of medication is like, how much dosage can we give you to keep you from dying? Like heart blood pressure medicine, right? Like just enough to keep you from dying. If we give you too much, then it can cause other negative side effects or whatever. That's a lot of...
And I think there is another part of it from my perspective too. As I tend to think about the recreational usage, okay? For me personally, those who struggle with some kind of pain are the ones that I tend to think about most.
Okay, yeah.
You follow me?
Yeah.
That there's, and granted,
You think about most empathetically, you mean? Is that
yeah,
what you're...
yeah.
Yeah.
Empathetically, and I realize there are those, and from who are dealing with cancer. You follow me? From those, there's some kind of pain. There's some kind of, very similar, when I think of cancer, very similar to someone who might get, in the later, stages of cancer, who might, get morphine.
Yeah.
You follow me? That kind of thing. That's where I have empathy.
Yeah.
For a person's individual. And yet there is that part of me on the other end of that spectrum, okay, that basically says, okay, but have you tried anything else? Have you actually sought out a PT, a physical therapist, to be able to exercise those muscles, stretch that part of your body, because a lot of it comes to lower back. When I'm from my perspective, what I'm dealing with people, it's my knees hurt, my lower back hurts, these things that I've worn my body out. Maybe in some ways. You follow me? So, and I think from my perspective, as I talk with other people, I think some of it is part of the aging process, which I think we have an issue with culturally, to be able to recognize. And then some of it, I think, comes back to that aspect of, okay, are there alternatives, or has this become my silver bullet, if you will?
Yeah. Coping mechanism.
My coping mechanism that basically is going to fix it for me. And yet we all know people who, may have even been scheduled for back surgery. They go see, a chiropractor that offers us, a stretch or and they don't necessarily have to have the surgery anymore. You know what I'm saying? Because they've been able to lengthen the spine in such a way that created more space between the vertebrae, that were pinching nerves before. That's how I'm looking at a lot of the industry, if you will, from a promotional standpoint. And I think, we have to be able to create healthy alternatives as well. Yes, they may not be as fancy, for lack of a better word, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. As attractive. If I, I have to work hard, to do the stretches every day. Yeah. I can't just necessarily sit down on my couch and use marijuana, which is far easier. Yeah. That kind of, and that's not a judgmental statement on my part. I don't want to, that I'm saying a person that chooses that option, is somehow lesser. I'm not, but I want to be able to recognize, and granted, like you're saying, I am not anti-medication at all. But I am to a point where I would say, yes, medication with therapy is a better option. Yeah. Because if I can learn some skills, if I can, get some abilities that, with journaling or something else to help me process these things. And I think, another complete topic, but I think a lot of the health issues we have to deal with the way we, process emotion. Yeah. There's definitely connections there, that, and then here again, I'm not going down that rabbit trail. I'm pulling back.
We got lots of them.
So yeah, that's kind of, I want to, at the end of the day, like you shared, I want to recognize I have empathy for people who desire to use from a pain circumstance. They are going through something and it helps minimize. And that's where I'm saying, okay, I understand that being prescribed and, those kind of things, the benefits thereof. And yet, that is more towards the medicinal, a little further away from the recreational. And that's where my concerns become, is when we self-medicate, that's a dangerous thing to do in any shape or form from my perspective.
I agree. I think it's even the idea to get therapy and to go to physical therapy to do these things where there's a medical professional involved is a privileged expectation.
I hear you.
Not everyone is going to have access to those things. So, and I think we're in the same place of just empathy. And I think that's a big part of what I would desire out of this episode too, is just that as you go about your life, recognize that this is a very real thing that people around you are dealing with, whether they're using or they have a brother who's using, and they have, whatever.
Sure. And
have grace for people and like, empathy, in the sense that someone is self-medicating, and you might be tempted to say, yeah, self-medication is a bad thing, therefore I judge you.
Sure.
Yeah, but maybe they need medication. They need to be medicated. They're doing it themselves. They shouldn't be, but they need help.
Sure.
How can you help them?
I hear you.
Versus standing on the pedestal and saying you're bad or whatever.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it's just purely recreational or whatever. It's just, it is what it is. And at the same time, is judgment helping that situation? No.
Sure.
No, I don't think it is. I think, being able to have conversations that say, hey, tell me more about that. Like, why do you do that? Like, what's the story there? Do you have any concerns about the legal implications? Like, if you were to get caught, like, have you thought through that? Being able to have those conversations in a non-judgmental way is going to be valuable. And as it becomes more legalized and that kind of thing, like, we need to be able, as believers, to help disciple each other and hold each other accountable in a way that's not like black and white. Like, oh, now I just realized my friend smokes marijuana. That's a paradigm I can't grok, and I don't know if we can be friends. And you just start avoiding them because you don't. It's like, that's not who I thought you were, and I don't think I like you anymore.
No, I hear you.
I think it's just really important that we start thinking about these things in a way that says, well, what would Jesus do in this circumstance? You know what I mean? Yeah. And I can't imagine walking, I think he would address the hard issues like he always did, and anyway.
And I think, and I want you to know, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I appreciate what you're sharing, about my perspective being, would you call it? Not hierarchical, but when not elitist. What's the word? Privileged. I respect what you're sharing. Not everyone has access to a PT to be able to talk to, or a privilege. I appreciate that point, and I think in some ways I respect the challenge there of it, because I can recognize that, by God's grace, I do have a lot of people that I personally can draw from. To be able to garner some advice, and I, from my perspective, on the other side of that, I also recognize that part of that is the other end of not living in isolation. Yeah. You follow me? Yeah. Because I think so often our tendency is to head towards that isolation. And from my perspective too, I don't think, I don't think the body, if you will, Christ designed for the body, is an elitist or, privileged perspective, to where I believe, when we engage in the body, I believe God has the ability to bring other people around me who can advise me in ways that doesn't necessarily cost me a lot. It may cost me something, but it's not like your average, doctor is going to say, well, you have to go, some of the doctors, some of the PTs I know are the most approachable people, to be able to say, hey, I'm dealing with this. Can you help me? And I think, those people are available. Let's put it that way. It's going to take some effort. It's going to take some work, but I think there are those people who are out there, and that's just part of the body as I see it.
Yeah. Like you said, it does take some work to find support.
Yes.
Because that's really what we're talking about, is support, and there are places that offer support. There's so many drug and addiction centers.
No doubt.
And, I think it's easy to think of those places as like for people who are broken, not people like me.
No, I hear you.
and celebrate recovery, whatever. But yeah, they're available for those who aren't so privileged that you can just go to the doctor and your health insurance covers it all, and it's just part of your routine existence. There are options, and I think going back, I'm not trying to oversimplify the whole doctor role, but moderation and accountability is available through other means besides a doctor. Going to a doctor's office.
Yep.
To agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing, Justin.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah. It's been a fun little podcast.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's very much how we see it.
Very much. So yes, by all means, all the disclaimers. We are not health advisors. We're not legal advisors. We are
like
not
I said, I think I
addictions.
might know the least about marijuana of anyone you know. So,
But thanks for having the conversation.
Yeah.
This is how I see it.